The need for security export control. This e-learning contains contents designed for the staff and students at academic and research institutions to understand basic aspects of the security export control. The security export control is indispensable in conducting international educational and research activities that accompany transfer of technologies or export of goods. For specific procedures, please be sure to properly implement them in accordance with the rules of each academic or research institution. As a result of screening at each academic or research institution, the license from the Minister of Economy, Trade, and Industry may be required. In this course, we will discuss the need for security export control. Production of this video is based on information available as of March 2018. Check the Security Export Control and other pages on the METI website for the latest information, as the information provided is frequently updated. The need for security export control. Security export control means to control transfer of technologies or export of goods, in order to prevent transfer of the technologies and goods that can be potentially diverted to weapons or military use by any such person who might conduct activities of concern as a nation, or terrorists who could threaten the peace and security of Japan and the international community as a whole. If advanced technologies or goods held by developed nations were transferred to a country developing weapons of mass destruction or a terrorist organization, it would become an international menace, a significant factor to destabilize the international situation. Because of this, strict control in every light, including direct transfers of technologies and export of goods as well as indirect ones, and roundabout exports is required in order to prevent the technologies and goods from outflowing to countries of concern or terrorist organizations. In recent years, activities of countries of concern and terrorist organizations to acquire technologies are becoming increasingly sophisticated, and therefore significance of contributing to preserving the peace and security of Japan and the international community is growing also for the scientific research activities by academic and research institutions. Aggravation of issues around security. In recent years, the security environment is becoming more complicated and aggravated, including frequent random terrorist attacks, multiple missile and nuclear weapons testing by North Korea, and increasing military expenditures in Asia. Actual case examples include the terrorism attacks by Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, ISIL, and suspected use of chemical weapons in the Middle East, economic sanctions against Russia backed by worsening Ukrainian situation, and massive reclamation activities by China in the Spratly Islands in the South China Sea. Now, getting more aggravated are the nuclear and missile issues in North Korea. The country conducted the 6th nuclear bombing testing in September 2017 and tested the 3rd ICBM launch in November of the same year, which is becoming a much more serious menace not only to the security of our country and region, but also to the international community. In these circumstances, it turned out that Japanese-made components were used in the ISIL bombs and that Japanese-made radars were used in the North Korean battleships. Stricter implementation of the security export control is called for to avoid unintended transfer of technologies or export of goods. Examples where civilian technologies can be used in military sphere. What we should care for based on the security export control are not just such military goods as weapons. With the recent leadership of civilian technologies in innovation, as well as movement of diversion of civilian technologies into military use, The significance of appropriately controlling not only goods, but also civilian technologies is growing. For example, carbon fibers are used for wider consumer applications including golf club shafts, fishing rods, and tennis rackets. On the other hand, carbon fiber technologies have also been used for such military applications as main wing material for fighter jets. Other examples of civilian technologies that can potentially be diverted to military use include active control suspensions and gallium nitride semiconductors. There are cases where countries of concern or terrorists dispatch researchers and students to acquire these civilian technologies divertible to military use, representing their increasingly diversified procurement activities. These civilian technologies with potential military use extensively exist also in academic and research institutions. Thus, considering the potential for military use, the unconfined studies for peaceful utilization have to be appropriately controlled even in academic or research institutions to keep them from being used for activities of concerns, including ones for WMD. An incident of illegal advanced technology outflow by a university professor. With acceleration of international human interactions and joint research projects with foreign institutions in academic and research institutions, opportunities to transfer technologies that are subject to security export control are rising. Then, in the U.S., an incident by which a university professor was arrested on a charge of violating laws in security export control actually occurred. Professor Roth of the University of Tennessee had concluded a joint research agreement with AGT for the plasma actuator for unmanned aerial vehicle. Meanwhile, AGT had already concluded a research agreement with the Air Force Research Laboratory on the plasma actuator for unmanned aerial vehicle. Without obtaining U.S. government license, Professor Roth and one of his ex-students, then working at AGT, Mr. Sherman, allowed the Chinese and Iranian students to access to reports on this research. Professor Roth also carried the computer containing the technical information on the research with USAF to China for lectures without obtaining U.S. government license. As a result, Professor Roth and Mr. Sherman ended up receiving a sentence of imprisonment. Thus, neglected control of the transfer of technologies based on a research activity at academic and research institutions is potentially subject to legal violation charges. Transfer export of technologies, goods subject to the control. Transfer of technologies and export of goods that are subject to the control in Japan are set forth by the Foreign Exchange and Foreign Trade Act. For compliance with the control under the Act, it is important to know specific cases that constitute transfer of technologies or export of goods by academic and research institutions set forth by the Act. For example, attention must be paid in accepting international students or researchers, or conducting joint research projects with foreign institutions. In addition to transfer, enhancement, or development of the experimental devices, information provided over phone calls or through email, regular classes, meetings, discussions, and research instructions can constitute transfer of technologies or export of goods set forth by the Act. Moreover, bringing or shipping samples overseas, orientation, and materials provided at accepting researchers from other countries, or verbally providing technical information in private lectures and exhibitions can also constitute the transfer of technologies or export of goods set forth by the Act. In conducting these transfer of technologies or export of goods, be sure to contact the right person of the responsible department of your academic or research institution to confirm specific procedures. As other e-learning programs discuss the details of the control system, including subject goods and technologies as well as subject export destinations, and required care and what sort of specific situations, check them as well. This concludes the discussion of the need for security export control.